It's my pleasure to welcome Jan Scheffler. Jan is a software engineer at Google, where he works on building Puppeteer. In his own words, Jan fell in love with the open web a long time ago and has been a web developer ever since, except at one point. He almost ended up running his own bread factory. I'll let Jan fill in that gap. Jan, over to you.
Yeah, hi. So let me get my audio started and also my video. Yeah, okay, cool. It works. Awesome. Yeah, and now to the slides. So I hope you can see them now.
Yep.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, so hi, I'm Jan, and in this presentation, I want to show you all how you can harness the power of Puppeteer, not just for testing, but primarily for testing. So, quick introduction. Yeah, so it's remote, so I can't see you, but you at least have a picture of me now. And yeah, so I'm Jan. I work on the Chrome DevTools team, and yeah, as you already said, I've been a web developer for almost as long as I can remember. And back then, frame sets were still a thing when I started, and like nobody thought about responsive design. So that has been a long time ago. And since then, a lot has changed, and it's very exciting to see how powerful and complex the web has become since. With great power comes great responsibility, and so in order to ensure that, it's nice to have proper testing in place, and that's what I want to talk to you about today. And yeah, so as for the menu today, I will start with talking about what is Puppeteer for those of you who haven't heard about it yet, and then I'll dive a bit into why it is maintained by the Chrome DevTools team, and then finally we get to the part about how Puppeteer can be used for testing and explore a few different scenarios there. So a quick summary of what Puppeteer is. On the left, you can see our logo, and on the right, yeah, you can see that it's a Node.js library, and we recently finished migrating it to TypeScript. That was a big effort, and yeah, it can be used to automate the browser in a bunch of different scenarios. Many people use it to take, for example, screenshots of websites or to generate PDF files from them. But of course, you can also use it for things like crawling or scraping, so like extracting data from websites, or just like if you're a bit lazy like me, you might use it to automate repetitive tasks in general. And yeah, last but not least, there's also the big aspect of testing. First of all, for a lot of you who haven't seen it in action before, you can see a recording here on how I did a very, very simple calculation. And so this is all automated via script. So there's no actual user interaction at all. And how you can do that, you will probably know that after the talk, I hope. So why is Puppeteer maintained by the Chrome DevTools team? In order to explain that, I prepared a very simple website just for like demo purposes. And it's nothing fancy, it's just a very simple Next.js app, and it's written in React. And yeah, so it's full of placeholders because the content is not that important after all for this presentation. And for all of you who are web developers, this is probably a very familiar view. So you can see that I opened DevTools in Chrome on the right. And DevTools shows you a bunch of different things about the website. Like in the elements panel, you can see the DOM structure, and you can find out about the styles on the website and how like everything ties together. And you can also see that when you hover over something in the elements panel, like the image in this case, it will be highlighted on the actual website. So apparently, there's some way for DevTools and the browser to communicate back and forth. And there's also a way to see what's going on there. So the communication, you can see at the bottom right corner, there's the protocol monitor open. It's something a bit hidden in DevTools. You can enable it via the experiments, and then you can see all the messages that get sent back and forth between the browser and DevTools. And you can see, like, when we zoom in a little, that there are a bunch of different methods that can be called. And like most of them, they have a request and a response. But you probably already spotted the one that doesn't have a request. In this case, that's page.frameResized. That is just an event that the client gets from the server. So the server can also like proactively communicate state changes like resize windows. So yeah.
Hey,
and
sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry to interrupt. A few folks are unable to see your slides. Do you mind stopping and resharing your screen?
Yeah, sure.
To see if, appreciate it.
Let's see if that works.
Folks, please give us the feedback if it's visible for you. I believe it's visible for folks that are using the Zoom client.
Does it work now?
Can you guys? Oh, it works now. Awesome. Well, oh.
Okay, cool. Thanks. Otherwise, I can also share the presentation if that helps people, so they can follow along if the line doesn't work. Yeah, let me know if that is needed. Okay, so where did I stop? Puppeteer, yeah. So right, we have the protocol monitor and all the commands that get sent back and forth, and like sometimes even events that are sent by the browser to the client. And this is all part of something called the Chrome DevTools protocol, short and CDP for short. So it's just a very like basic, not that basic protocol implemented on top of WebSockets. And Puppeteer is just using the very same protocol that DevTools is using to control the browser. So whatever you can do with DevTools, you can also do it with Puppeteer. And sometimes even a bit more. So that's the exciting part of it. Yeah, okay, so you're probably very excited by now and want to try out Puppeteer. So how do you get started with it? This is a code, yeah, so you can install it by npm, by using npm install Puppeteer. And it will download Chromium version with it that you can use for, or that it will use for testing. But it can also be used with Google Chrome or Microsoft Edge, or any other Chromium-based browser. And also there's increasing support for Firefox there. So the team there is making good progress on adding support for Firefox. And then the next step, of course, would be to require the package. And we use async await heavily for Puppeteer. So while top-level await is slowly running out, not all environments have it yet. So we usually start with an immediately invoked async function expression here. So that's just a wrapper to get the await functionality. And then, of course, the first step would be to actually launch a browser. By default, this will use the Chromium version that comes with the npm installation. But you can also pass it an executable path to start whatever other browser you want to use. And by default, the browser will start in headless mode, so you can't actually see what's going on. That's pretty neat because it allows you to also run on servers or like other environments that might not have a screen available. And with the browser started, we can open up a new page, and on this new page, we can then navigate to whatever website you want. So whatever you can open with a normal Chrome instance or your usual browser, you can also navigate to with Puppeteer. And by default, you can see that there's an await before the page.goto, and this await will wait for the page to settle a bit. So it will not return immediately after the site has been navigated to, but it will wait until the DOM content loaded event, which will be important later on in the talk. So, and yeah, like I would love to extend the script to be a bit useful. So I just included taking a screenshot here, and the screenshot will then be stored in on the given pub. And this is it. That's the screenshot we're gonna get. And you might be wondering, hey, this seems a little bit different than what we saw previously. And that's because by default, Puppeteer will use a report size of 800 by 600, but you can change it to whatever you want. So that's not a restriction, it's just the default. Yeah, and of course, as a good citizen, we can close the browser afterwards. So we clean up a bit after ourselves. Yeah, and now you might be thinking, okay, this is awesome, but how can I use it for testing? So let's dive into that. Yeah, first of all, Puppeteer itself, it focuses on automating the browser. So it does not include a test runner like Mocha or Jest or like Cypress, for example. And yeah, for this talk, I chose to use Jest with that for that case, and the Jest Puppeteer package. Yeah, it's just because I love Jest, so it's a great tool to use, and it's just a personal preference of mine. So you don't have to. There are a bunch of different libraries that you can use to get Puppeteer for testing. And then, yeah, with Jest Puppeteer, we already get a like running browser instance and a page provided for our test cases. So we can get started right away. In this case, before every test, I want to navigate to the page under test, just to make sure that I get a clean state. And then as a first test, I want to make sure that the page has the expected type. So in this case, I use the page.getTitle or page.title function to get the title, and this will return a promise, and we wait for it to be resolved to something and expect it to be example website. And so let's run Jest with that and see what happens. And yeah, so Jest is happy with us in this case. You can see that we have like the test suite demo website, and we have the passing test, should have the correct title and a nice summary of what Jest did. And now we also want to make sure that the other way around works too. Like let's see what's happening when we change the expected title to something that is obviously wrong. So in this case, I chose it to be the wrong title. And when I run Jest again now, it will start complaining about it. So you can see exactly which test fails. They should have the correct title. That's not too surprising because for now it's just the only test that we have, but still it comes in very handy later on when you have more tests. And you can clearly see what the expected value was and what we received. And you can also see a div there. And I feel that is pretty useful. For these short strings, maybe not so much, but the longer strings definitely benefit from having a short div there. Yeah, so with the basics in place and just running, we can start to add more complex test cases. So for most of them, I guess you will want to take a look at a specific like item on the page. In this case, I chose the login button at the top right. And if you open the page in DevTools again and right click on the element, there's an option to copy the CSS selector to it. And in this case, that's what I ended up with. So you can see this is a pretty long selector, and it's also not very like descriptive. And like when I think about reiterating on the script in a couple of days, I would probably have forgotten what the selector actually selected. I could add a comment there, true, but we thought, okay, maybe there's an easier way to identify elements on the page. And in order to do so, we took a look at the accessibility tree. So you're probably all aware of the DOM tree. that's what you usually see in the Elements panel. But we added support to also show you the accessibility tree that will be used for like accessibility tools like screen readers or other accessibility tools. And the accessibility tree is derived from the DROM tree. You can see that different elements, they have different roles. You can see web area or generic or image, or for the case of our login button, it's an anchor. And these nodes can also have names. That's what you see for the web area, that's example website, or for the login button, the name is login. And yeah, so we can actually use that in Puppeteer to query for an element on the page. And that would look like this. It's a lot shorter and a lot more self-descriptive, I think, and a lot easier to maintain over time. So this uses the area accessibility tree and finds the element with the name logged into it. Okay, cool. So back to the test case. With this new selector, it will look something like this. You can see I have the page dot and then the $sign that we use to select something from the page. And we can pass it the selector, and in return, we get an element. And in this case, we just check for its existence. So we check if it's truthy, and this test passes. But you know, websites, and that like they sometimes take a long time to load. So by the point where you run the test, not all elements might have been loaded yet. So here's the next slide. Yeah. Just to showcase something, I added the newsletter box at the bottom. You can see it has a name and an email input field. And I configured it to only show up after 1.5 seconds. So it will not be visible when the page finishes loading, but only after a certain time. And this would break the test. So if we use the area selector for the name field and expect it to be truthy, it will not be. It will be null because the element is not there yet. So what can we do about this? In this case, we have the wait for selector function, and that comes in very handy because it does not return before the given selector matches something. And of course, it doesn't wait forever. Like the default timeout is 30 seconds. And if the element does not show up in that time, it will just throw an error. So the test will fail. But you can also configure the timeout to whatever, like fits your use case. So yeah, you can be sure that afterwards the element will be truthy. Right, yeah, so now that we have the newsletter pop up there, we actually, or I want to do something useful with it. So after selecting the element, I can, of course, type something into it. The type method will use the actual input layer of the browser to dispatch individual keystrokes. So the input field of the page on the test will actually see a key down, a key press, an input, a key up event for the J, and then the same for A and N. So it will not be able to distinguish actual user input from input that Puppeteer is sending it. And yeah, as the power user that I am, I want to switch to the email field. And I do so, of course, by hitting the tab key instead of by clicking on it. So I can use this to send the tab key to the website. And this will move the focus from the name field to the email field. And that's why I also don't have to select the email field with the wait for selector method, but can instead just like continue typing away and give it my email address. And then finally, I just submit the form by hitting enter. So that's easy, right? Instead of hitting enter, there's also the possibility to just click on the submit button. So in this case, yeah, I decided to not select the element first and then call element.click on it, but instead just directly use the page.click function and pass it as selector, and this will then do the work for me. So this will then look up the element with the corresponding selector and click on it, and I feel like this is a good way to shorten up the code. Great, yeah. So I think we're making good progress with the basics so far. There's one more thing that I want to show before we get in the more advanced topics. And this is like an escape hatch for almost any situation. So I usually prefer to regard everything that happens within the page that I'm going to test as internal state that I do not want to like alter or read out. I just want to like interact with the actual UI elements, but we all know that like sometimes you have to get your hands dirty in order to get the job done. So I'm going to show you how. For these situations, you can use page.evaluate, and that's pretty much what happens if you type something into the DevTools console tool. So in this case, I decided to just use a console log to make it easy. And then what will happen? Puppeteer will take the function that you passed to evaluate and turn it into a string. And then the string will be sent to the page after some minor modifications maybe. And it will then be executed inside the page just as something that you would type into the DevTools console. So this will not be executed in the context of the Puppeteer script, but in the context of the page. And of course, it can also be used to extract information from the page. So in this case, the snippet returns something, and of course, Puppeteer can then read out the return value. So in this case, I just evaluate something that returns false, and then Puppeteer can pick up that value and just like proceed as it has always been inside of Puppeteer. You can even pass in arguments to the evaluated snippet. So in this case, I first get the login button with the page.dollar method. And as soon as I have the element, I evaluate something in the context of the page and I pass it the element. So for the page itself, it will have the node available. And then I can just return whatever attribute I'm interested in this case, the disabled attribute, and yeah, from there on it will go to the Puppeteer script again. Yeah, so because this is a rather common scenario, we already went ahead and included a $eval method for it. So you can pass it the selector, and it will then query that element and pass it as the first argument to the function that is executed in the context of the page. Okay, yeah, cool. So let's get to the a bit more advanced stuff, and I hope you're as excited as I am about that. Yeah, so as you probably know, people experience color in like many different ways. So while the example website will probably look like this for most users, there are quite a few people out there who might not experience it like that. One way could be like this. That's actually me a couple of weeks ago when I had surgery on my eyes. So after that, the whole world looked a bit like this for me. But there might also be people who cannot distinguish colors at all, or who can only cannot see specific colors like red or green or blue. And in order to help these people experience your website, you can make sure that it's still accessible with those color vision deficiencies. And Puppeteer allows you to emulate them quite easily. While they have very complicated name like achromatopsia, it's pretty straightforward to use these inside of Puppeteer to see what the page would look like to these users. Another interesting thing is to emulate the different time zones. Whenever your page uses time in any way and displays something, you might wonder, okay, someone on the other side of the world, how might they see the website then in their time zone? So I chose, for the first run, I chose the time zone that I'm based in, Europe, Berlin. And then for the second run, I chose the New Zealand time. So that's literally on the other side of the world. Another interesting possibility is to emulate different geo positions. So whenever you have an application that uses the Geo API, you might want to know what happens if like the user is somewhere else. So you can set whatever position you want. In this case, I chose the location of the Google office in Mountain View. But of course, you also have to make sure that the script can actually access them. So you have to override the permissions for the page in order to give it access to the geolocation. Otherwise, as you probably know, it will just like ask the user with the pop-up. But given that most times you're running headless, it will not actually be shown and just fail. So it's important to override the permissions. And another important thing can be to emulate a slow CPU. In this case, I chose a factor of 4 to slow down my CPU, which puts me in the range of some like mid-class mobile phone. And it is very important to like be aware that your website might be used by a bunch of different people in a bunch of different like devices or like situations, and you want to make sure that it's always fast for them. So it's a good way to experience how they might experience your website. But yeah, it's just an emulation, so make sure that you actually also use real devices, because there are so many different factors that play into the performance of a device that we can't emulate them all. Same goes for the network condition emulation. So in Germany, we do have Wi-Fi on the trains, at least sometimes, but sometimes it's also very slow. So this could be a good way to learn what a user of your website might experience your page like on such a slow network condition. And yeah, now that we are already talking about network conditions, I also want to show you an advanced topic called request interception. And you can use it to turn this into this. So yeah, you probably have seen that the images are missing. So how did I do that? First of all, we have to enable request interception. And then we can register a handler that will be called for every request that the browser wants to send out. So this request object will contain all the relevant information, like method or headers or the post data, or also the resource type. And I'm using the resource type in this case to check if it's an image. And yeah, with that in place, you have 3 different ways to then proceed with the request. There's the request.continue, that just like tells the browser to continue with the request as usual. But you can also abort it. There's a third option that I'll show you in a sec. So with the abort in place, you can also so yeah, you have to reload the page afterwards, of course, because otherwise there won't be any request to intercept. So I added the reload and then the screenshot here. But you can also use it to block all scripts, for example. So you can see that I changed image to script here. Or you can use it to block all web fonts, and which will turn this website preview into this. And now you can also see what is the secret text behind the nice bars that I put in place there. So that has been done with a web font. This is another example for the request interception, and for the third option that we have here. You can see that instead of continuing or aborting, I chose to respond in this case, and respond just overrides whatever like you want. So you can set a custom status, or you can set custom headers, or you can also change the body. And in this case, I used it to mock the API, sign-in API, to always return a successful response. Yeah, so last but not least, I want to show you a way to test for visual regressions. First of all, there's a very nice Jest package for that. It's called Jest Image Snapshot. And yeah, it's super handy for this use case. So we can just take a screenshot of the page that we want to test. And then we can take the binary data that represents the image and pass it on to the library and have it match the image with the snapshot that has been recorded previously. So for the first run, it will just use whatever it gets passed as the baseline image. So that's why you see in one snapshot written here. And then for the second run, I changed something a little bit. And now you can see that the expected image did not match the snapshot closely enough, and the test failed. And you can see that it also prints out the cdiff for details in the console. So when you opening up that diff, you will see the original website on the left and the newly recorded website on the right. And in between the two, there will be a screenshot that highlights the differences in red. So you can see that the login button is very red in the middle. That's because I changed the background color from green to blue. And if that was an intended change, we can update the expectations and have a new baseline. Otherwise, we have to fix. Yeah, so another thing that might be interesting is this package. It's called Puppeteer Screen Recorder, and you can just use it to record a screencast of what you do on the page. And this is the result. So you can see that the images and the font, they load a bit delayed. And with that, we already come to an end to leave room for questions. But before I give over, I want to show you our website. So this is a great resource to learn more about Puppeteer and all the APIs that we have in place. And you can also check out our GitHub repository, and maybe even become one of our many users or of the many contributors that we have, because we raise a lot of new contributions. Right. So with that, if there are any questions left, we can discuss them in the Q&A. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jan. Thanks for a great session. We have a bunch of questions. So we can get before we get into questions, quick announcement. You'll see a yes or no poll on your screen. Would appreciate if you can fill it out. Thank you. Okay, let's get into questions. Okay, first round of questions will be around features that Puppeteer supports. Is there a way to get console logs without a listening event?
Console log without listening for an event. We have on the page object, there's on console, and you can use that to learn about whatever gets printed to the console, but without an event, that will not be possible because that's something that is initiated on the page and the client wouldn't know about it otherwise. So we have to listen for that event.
We have a few questions around languages and frameworks that Puppeteer supports. What are the different languages that I can use Puppeteer with?
So Puppeteer is a Node.js library. So like on that side, you can only use Node.js or whatever supports Node.js. And on the web page you can do whatever you want. So it's just a normal browser, and whatever runs in your Chrome instance or on your Microsoft Edge browser or stuff like that. So that will also run in for Puppeteer. So there's no restriction on whether you use Angular or React or just a plain old HTML website. That all works the same.
Awesome. How does Puppeteer handle promises? Can I use explicit waits while testing?
You can use, like I showed a bunch of examples, and they use async await, so that works just out of the box. You can also use async await inside the evaluated snippets that I showed earlier. So you can also have something async happening inside like the page and then return that result later. That works both ways.
Awesome. Can you tell us a bit about your browser support?
Yeah, right. So CDP, like it started out as something to that belonged to the Chromium ecosystem. So that's what the Chrome DevTools use to communicate to the browser. And at some point, we decided to like also allow other clients to connect to the browser and automate it. So that's how it's started out. And by now, you can use Microsoft Edge because that's a big Chromium-based browser, and you can also use Google Chrome, of course, as a Chromium-based browser. And probably all the I'm not sure about this, but I think Electron would also be supported as it uses Chromium internally. And of course, we started supporting Firefox, but that's still work in progress. But the support is already pretty great.
Awesome. What are the different type of locators that I can use in Puppeteer, like CSS?
Yeah, so I showed you the CSS selectors, and we recently added support for the area selectors. We also have a pierce selector that can pierce through shadow DOMs, shadow roots. So that might also be interesting for you. And like whatever you can do in the page, you can also use as a selector. So you could, in theory, use the page.evaluate method to do whatever in the page and have it return an element, and then we can use the element from that point on, also in the context of Puppeteer.
Awesome. Can I integrate my test cases with Jenkins?
I have never used Jenkins before, so I can't like speak in details about that. But my my initial reaction would be yes. But maybe there's already a discussion about that online somewhere. So maybe Googling for it will turn up a better result than I can give at this point. So yeah, I just never used Jenkins before.
Sure. Does Puppeteer have support for API testing and native app testing?
So for the API part, I showed the example where I mocked an API endpoint, and you can use Puppeteer to manipulate whatever request is sent between the browser and the client. So the browser and the server. So whatever API you use that uses like fetch or XHR or I don't know, some other way to communicate between the browser and the server, you can intercept those requests and return whatever response you want. And for the apps, we don't support apps because they are like not based on Chromium. So like there might be exceptions of apps that run on Chromium, so we would support them, but like normal Android or iOS apps, I don't think we do support them.
Can Puppeteer be used for?
Can you repeat that again?
Yeah, sorry about that. So the question is around JavaScript errors. Is it possible to get the errors triggered in the Chrome browser console?
Yes, we have a listener for that. I think it's page.onError. but I'm not sure about the specific name, but you can register an event listener for that. It's best to just check out the documentation that we have. There's a huge list of all the events that we have. One of them is for the JavaScript exceptions that happen to the page here.
Sure. How does Puppeteer handle robot classes? Meaning, will I be able to select a document from my computer and upload it to a web portal?
Robot classes? I'm not sure if I understood you correctly.
So I think the scenario that they want to test is being able to upload a document from your computer to a website.
Yeah, that's possible. So whenever there's like a some way to upload something, Puppeteer does support that. You can just provide it the file that it's supposed to upload, and then it will inject that into the page. I'm currently working on a change to also add drag and drop of files, but that has not ended yet. So that doesn't work yet, but doing it the other way around does work. Yeah.
Awesome. A few other questions around test scenarios. Can we use Puppeteer to simulate OAuth scenarios like Google Auth?
Yeah, so whatever a normal user can do in the browser, you can also do it with Puppeteer. So if you think about an auth flow as like a pop-up window that opens up, you will get the pop-up through Puppeteer, and then you can just type in the email address and the password, for example, and just like click through that flow and have it then return to the original page. So that does work. There are examples online of how to do that. I think there are even some in our repository, but it's possible. Yeah, just do a quick Google search for that and return up a pretty useful result for that.
Can I test iframes using Puppeteer?
Yes, iframes are fully supported in Puppeteer. There are like the new concept of out-of-process iframes. That's something that is not as well supported yet. You can still interact with them when you embed something from a different domain. But normal iframes works like out of the box, and for those out-of-process iframes, you have to use a little workaround, but that works too. Yeah.
Awesome. Is Puppeteer suitable for Salesforce CRM automation?
I've never used Salesforce CRM before, so I'm not sure about the compatibilities. But as long as you are able to run a Node.js script and install something from the NPM registry and have it download the Chromium, it should work. Yeah, but I don't know about the specifics of the Salesforce CRM system. So.
Next question, another question around, does Puppeteer test accessibility standards like Heroes?
Yeah, there's a library for that. You can use it to run these kind of tests on top of Puppeteer. You can also use Puppeteer to run a Lighthouse audit, for example. So you get all the scores that Lighthouse would show you, like performance or accessibility metrics. So that works. Yeah.
Awesome. Is there a way to use Puppeteer to check the requests sent from the browser?
Yeah, so I showed the request interception API. You can, like, if you leave it out or set it to false, you only get the request event. You will not be able to modify the request then, but you still get information about what the browser sent. And there's also the page.onResponse event, I think, that will give you the responses that Puppeteer receives.
A few questions around comparing with other frameworks. What are advantages of Puppeteer over Selenium?
Well, Puppeteer comes with a very tight integration into what the Chromium browsers can. So there are a bunch of things that I don't know about the specifics here, but there are things that Puppeteer can do that Selenium can't do, because Selenium just has to be cross-browser compatible. And that's at the same time the downside of Puppeteer. So Puppeteer is only like able to automate the browsers that I told you about, and it will not be able to, for example, interact with Safari at this point.
How would Puppeteer compare to Selenium headless?
I think the same restrictions apply there. So yeah, it's not like cross-browser like Selenium. Selenium supports a bunch of browsers that we don't, but it might be more powerful for the browsers that we do support.
And there's a question around comparison between Puppeteer and Playwright. If you could list a few key differences.
Yeah, so Playwright is something that has been developed by Microsoft, and it recently, like a bunch of the people that worked on Puppeteer previously moved to Microsoft and then started working on Playwright. And I haven't checked out the differences in great detail. I think Playwright supports Safari too, and maybe some other browsers too. I'm not sure about that. And they also have like a very similar API, but there are some differences. But I'm not quite sure about the exact details there.
Sure. Another question, comparing Puppeteer to Protractor.
Mm-hmm.
Any key differences or advantages that you would list for Puppeteer in comparison to Protractor?
That's difficult. I haven't used Protractor myself, so I'm not sure about the details there. But it sounds like there's great interest in a comparison between the test suites. So maybe, like, I don't know if it would be of interest for some people to maybe dig into that and like put that online somewhere. It feels like many people could benefit from this kind of comparison. Just putting it out.
Yeah, we could put something together.
Yeah, that could also be a call. Cool.
A few other questions. Does Puppeteer support any test execution report and screenshots?
Yeah, so Puppeteer can take screenshots of individual elements on the page, but also on the page as a whole, or like it can like take a screenshot of the viewport, or also like scroll down the page and like grab a screenshot of everything that is on the page. So yeah, that works. About the test execution results, so you can use Puppeteer to gather whatever information you're interested in, and then like use the framework that you use for testing to report them.
Can Puppeteer be used with the test on mobile browsers?
So I haven't personally used it or tried it before, but I think given that there's like Chromium on mobile browsers too, it should be able to connect to those, but I'm not sure about the details there. So haven't tried it yet. It's yeah, I would probably give it a try after this talk. It sounds interesting.
There's a question around record and playback. Is there a way to record user actions and then manipulate the code to produce scenarios?
Yeah, so I think there are a bunch of third-party providers that do so. Testem is, I think, one of them. You can use Testem to record your user interactions and then export them as a Puppeteer script.
Can I run tests in parallel using Puppeteer?
Yes, you can. So depending on how your framework supports it, you can, in theory, just have like multiple pages open at the same time and interact with them in parallel. or also have like multiple browser instances open at the same time. So it can be used in parallel, but it might, like, because the browser by default uses caching and stuff like that, it might, like, these tests might interfere on the browser level. Or like if you think about cookies, they are shared between different sessions. So in these cases, it's best to use different browser contexts. Like you can think of them as like multiple incognito windows to separate the pages on the test.
Can we test for Lighthouse metrics?
Yeah, there's a good example in the Lighthouse repository on how to use Lighthouse with Puppeteer together. And you can get like all the metrics that you would normally get from Lighthouse also through these integration there.
Awesome. So I think we've covered most of the questions, but there may be a few more. If you can stay back, Jan, and maybe answer a few of them live, that would be awesome. But we're out of time for questions. Appreciate you coming on board, giving a great session. Guys, let's give it up for Jan.
Yeah, so if there are like any unanswered question, feel free to reach out to me, or feel free to drop us an issue on the repository, and we're happy to look into that. So, right.
Thanks, Jan.
All right. So thank you so much, and bye-bye.